Diet is a really touchy subject that can elicit some pretty strong opinions, with people seemingly falling into two camps. The first is those who believe that raw feeding your dog or cat will result in the best health possible, while at the same time blaming commercial diets, especially dry kibble, for causing all the different diseases our pets can suffer from. The other group claims that raw feeding is incredibly dangerous, it's irresponsible, and it has absolutely no place in the feeding of dogs or cats. There is, of course, actually a third group which you might fall into, and that's people who are looking to provide the best diet possible for their dog or cat and want to know what the evidence is behind different feeding practices. Finding this balanced view is pretty challenging, but here goes. Hi, I'm Dr. Alex from ourpetshealth.com, helping you and your pet to live a healthier, happier life. And if you're new to this channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. And also, this is going to be a really long video today. This is not an easy topic, but I'm going to break it down into kind of bite-sized pieces, and hopefully you'll follow along and you'll be happy with that. If you don't have time to watch this today, then I've also got this as an ebook, so a free ebook, and I'll leave the link down in the description that you can go and download the ebook for free and kind of digest it, reread it and consume it at your own pace. How can you possibly decide what to feed your dog or cat when every single Google search throws up a vast amount of conflicting information? It can be really confusing. You know, certain websites will publish nothing but praise for raw food, and others will do the exact reverse. Add in the fact that the vast majority of this information on both sides is based on an individual's experience or personal opinion, with the evidence backing it up being actually nearly impossible to track down. You know, confusion reigns. So, which is it? Does feeding a raw diet to your dog or cat result in improved general health, a stronger immune system with fewer allergies, better intestinal health, improved skin and coat quality, healthier teeth and gums, more muscle and energy, reduced obesity and less cancer? Or on the flip side, are you actually more likely to compromise your own health alongside that of your pet by feeding a raw food through nutritional deficiencies, infectious disease transmission, intestinal obstruction and perforation, multi-resistant infections, tooth fractures and oral trauma? And this highlights a couple of problems from the very outset. You know, what do we mean when we say a raw diet, and what exactly is a commercial diet? We're clumping potentially very different foods together and calling them the same thing when really they couldn't be further from the truth. So raw diets can be anything from commercially produced frozen or freeze-dried packaged food, a raw meaty bones diet, a biologically appropriate raw food diet or a bath diet, or any number of other kind of home-prepared diets. A raw diet could simply be a person who feeds their dog nothing but uncooked mince. And you'll appreciate how different these diets are from one another. Similarly, when it comes to commercial diets, there are, the same issues present. Do we mean the cheapest food available, produced by a company with very little experience in formulating pet food, with a focus on obtaining ingredients as cheaply as possible regardless of their questionable source? Or instead, do we mean diets that are formulated by a large team of expert nutritionists that contain high-grade, human-quality ingredients and have gone through a thorough analysis as well as feeding trials? Again, these diets should not be expected to be similar in terms of the health outcome for the pet being fed them, and so to group them together into one kind of commercial category is maybe not the best thing to do. And the other question is it really an all or nothing situation? Is the topic as black and white as is often made out? Is one form of feeding really so optimal and the other so detrimental that it is a clear-cut decision, as the vast majority of commentators will make on either side? Let's have a look at the evidence, and we're going to start with the benefits of feeding a raw diet to your pet. And the first question to ask here is, are raw-fed dogs healthier? So let's start with the most basic question and work our way up. Are the majority of dogs fed on a raw food generally healthy? Not healthier, but healthy. And even this is actually certain to say, for evidence out there is poor at best. And I'd imagine, though, that the answer is a resounding yes. Most pets fed on raw diets are reasonably healthy, whatever that means. When surveyed in one study, the vast majority, so over 98.5% of pet owners, felt that their dog or cat was healthy. And while the study didn't split the results out by feeding type, given that 16% of dog owners and 9% of cat owners were feeding bones or raw food, as part of their main meal, and 3% of owners were feeding an entirely home-prepared meal. Most of these pets that were fed a raw diet, either in part or entirely, would have been considered healthy. Now, this study though is pretty poor evidence, because after all, what does healthy actually mean? And as an owner survey, really, is that the best way to determine this? And you should check out my article all about the placebo effect if you want to know more about that. But still, when evidence is lacking, you've got to go with what you've got. Now, other raw feeders point to the fact that dogs are suffering from more diabetes, more cancer, more immune problems, and a raft of other conditions compared to the halcyon days of years gone by. Now, the two causes of this that they will claim are, yes, vaccination and commercial pet food. Now, of course, when it comes to the evidence for these claims, its authors simply claim that they don't just believe it to be true, they strongly believe it to be true, and so it must be the case. Now, there's actually no evidence, apart from anecdote, that raw-fed dogs suffer from fewer allergies. There's no evidence that they suffer from less diabetes, and there's no evidence that they don't develop epilepsy. So there is no evidence. This is really getting a bit boring, isn't it? It's that phrase again, there is no evidence. Now, on the flip side, I have no evidence to put to you that it is not the case. The absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. So commercial feeding may be resulting in the increase in specific diseases, and while I strongly doubt this, we just don't know for certain. Now, of course, there are other explanations for this increase in disease, such as improved diagnostic testing, a pet population that is living for longer than it ever used to, and theories such as the hygiene hypothesis, for example, as to why allergies and allergic disease in particular is becoming more common. So speculation is one thing, but what I really do take serious issue with is people passing off opinion and conjecture as unquestionable, unrefutable fact, often at the same time slinging mud at the naysayers in the process. Not only is this irresponsible, but it could also have some serious damaging consequences, such as those detailed in my kind of discussion, my video all about the use of homeopathy. Let's move on to intestinal health and function, the next claimed benefit of raw feeding. Now, there is a single review paper which concludes that the idea that the digestive enzymes present in fresh food increase how well the nutrients within the food are able to be absorbed by the gut, and that this idea has some merit. Not a ringing endorsement, but rather a suggestion that this could be a sound idea. Now, fecal quality and stool volume is a popular topic of conversation with raw feeders, the claim being that raw-fed cats and dogs produce less fecal material, and what is produced is drier and less sloppy. Now, this is then taken as evidence that not only are raw diets more digestible, but that this, by implication, means that they are also healthier than commercially fed pets. Now, I have no reason to doubt the stool quality difference, and the fact that this is easier to pick up on dog walks, which is something claimed by so many people. For me, though, it is a jump too far to claim that this improved digestibility automatically means that an animal's health is supercharged in comparison to their poor, commercially fed, cooked diet companions. So let's consider this for a second. Cooked egg is incredibly digestible, and eating nothing but this would mean that you'd produce very little stool, and it would most likely be a little dry nugget as a bonus when it comes to picking it up. I ask you this though, would a diet of nothing but egg be a healthier option than your current diet? We also need to look at the evidence though, however scant it may be. So from what I can see in the one study looking at a comparison of digestibility, stool character and gut bacteria between dry, wet and raw diets, the results are really pretty dull. There was no difference in digestibility, fecal quality was not much different, with raw diets actually causing softer and higher volume stools, and there was actually a potentially negative change in gut bacteria in the raw fed dogs. Now, this study though, it does come with some huge caveats, and that is that each diet was only fed for a relatively short time, and so long-term conclusions are just impossible to make. Maybe that once a gut is used to having that food, so a raw diet, all of those things that were different actually change. And this is an issue I'll come back to a number of times in this review, the kind of short-term nature of trials. So next up, we've got the raw food avoids evil grains. So another claim frequently made is that dogs are wolves and do not have a capacity to digest grains found in commercial pet foods. At best, the grain additions, they're just worthless bulking agents that are used because they're cheap, but in effect the same as adding sawdust to a diet, which is something that I've actually seen written many times. But at worst though, these grains are responsible, at least in part, for all manner of ailments affecting the modern day pampered pooch, from skin allergies through to diabetes and cancer. Now, given wolves evolved over millennia and dogs have only been our closest companion for about 20 to 40,000 years, which is a mere blink of the eye in evolutionary terms, surely there is something to this claim. Let's consider this, however. There is clear evidence that one of the earliest adaptations of the domestic dog's ancestors allowed them to thrive on starch-based diets, so grains. In other words, it allowed them to make full use of early man's table scraps. Dogs have in fact been shown to possess genes that allow them to utilise starches. It's not wrong though to suggest that in normal situations the process of evolution is a pretty long and drawn out affair, and on average it takes about 1 million years for a new species to emerge. Dogs though did not come about through normal natural selection and survival of the fittest in the Darwinian sense of the phrases, in the same way that other species have developed. Humans instead have aggressively and relentlessly selected for the characteristics that make dogs suitable companions. So that could be the ability to protect but not attack the family, the ability to provide companionship, the ability to work livestock without eating them, the ability to be a child's plaything and look cute, and presumably as well the ability to thrive on kitchen scraps and leftovers without vomiting or leaving diarrhea all over the place. Can you really tell me that breeds as different on the outside as Great Danes, Chihuahuas and Whippets are exactly the same as wolves on the inside? There is no controversy in the fact that there are massive differences in genetic diseases between breeds, so why is it so hard to accept that when it comes to the digestive process, wolves and dogs are most definitely not the same? It is true that dogs do not have an absolute requirement for starches, meaning that if they are eliminated entirely from the diet, a dog will not by default suffer from a serious nutritional deficiency. But not dying though is a pretty low benchmark to set as optimal, when what we all really want to do, regardless of where you stand in this debate, is to optimise health rather than just ensure survival. So grains can be a valuable source of a number of vitamins and minerals and may very well contribute to an improvement in body health. That's not to say, of course, though, that all grains are made equal, nor that grains should make up the bulk of the ingredients of a diet. It is also not to say that grains are beneficial to have in a diet. Again, there is little evidence to suggest that they are responsible for improving health. It might be much easier to make bold claims filled with certainty. It is probably also easier to hear these claims, as they take away the stress and difficulty of having to make a complex decision. Unfortunately, the reality is far from clear-cut. So the fact that raw-fed dogs have cleaner teeth and healthier mouths is perhaps one of the areas where a small amount of common ground can be found between the die-hard raw diet supporters and those who strongly advise against it being fed to both dogs and cats. So pets fed on raw meat and bones have cleaner teeth and healthier mouths. Or do they? Well, anecdotal evidence it's just overwhelming, but I've already mentioned how this can be misleading. I would even add my voice to the mix, as I feel that the patients that I see in my consult room that are fed either a raw diet or who receive bones, by and large do have significantly cleaner teeth. Does this mean that they have healthier mouths though? Well, not necessarily. When we think of dental disease and poor oral health, we picture heavy tartar with inflamed and ulcerated gums. You know, not only is this process painful, but it also has a detrimental effect on overall body health. But if I've said that I believe raw or bone-fed dogs have healthier teeth, then why am I suggesting that this is not always resulting in healthier mouths? Well, the reason is this. I also feel that dogs fed on bones, which is the situation for a significant proportion of raw-fed dogs, suffer from a much greater incidence of fractured teeth. So slab fractures of the large upper premolar, which is also known as the carnassial, being the most common. Now, this incidence is going to be heavily dependent on the type of bone given to a dog. So those fed on the large weight-bearing bones of cows or sheep are at most risk, with those being fed on softer bones like chicken necks being much less likely to develop fractured teeth. When a fracture is present though, not only does this result in painful exposure of the root canal, it also gives bacteria an easy highway to the base of the tooth, causing a dental abscess and also generalised effects on the rest of the body. To make matters worse, I do also tend to find that owners are hesitant to do anything about these broken teeth, even when it's put to them that they are incredibly painful. Instead, they choose to leave them untreated because the effects that they are having on their dog remain hidden. And hey, the teeth look clean, right? All that said, again, what does the actual evidence suggest? Well, interestingly enough, the evidence that raw-fed dogs have cleaner teeth than those fed commercial kibble or wet diets is actually very weak. It is there for bone-fed dogs, with some support for the fact that bones reduce periodontal disease, so your plaque, tartar and gingivitis. When it comes to other forms of raw feeding, however, there is simply no evidence that any other form of diet makes any difference. So next up, let's discuss the fact that raw diets might be safer than kibble. So pet food recalls trigger a lot of anxiety in dog owners. It's perfectly understandable. No matter how you feel on the subject, you must recognise that the main driver behind the choice to feed a pet dog or a pet cat a specific diet is to maintain and optimise their health. The last thing anyone wants is to make pets sick. Of course, you may subscribe to the belief that veterinarians and the pet food industry are all in cahoots, conspiring to keep pets unwell so that they can be milked for all they're worth. Well, have no fear, I'll be discussing conspiracy theories in just a little bit. Now, there have been several prominent pet food recalls, with the most recent one to hit the headlines being the contamination of several different brands with toxic levels of vitamin D. And actually the premium diet Hills is being the main one in the spotlight here. If you want to learn more, then I've actually got a separate video all about this, and I'll leave that in the link down below. Now, the next most recent and serious widespread recall was the 2007 melamine pet food recall, where contaminants in vegetable products imported from China and then used in the manufacture of dog and cat diets resulted in kidney failure, and the owner reported death of around 3,600 cats and dogs. Now, there's also the link between grain-free diets and heart failure in dogs that I've already mentioned. Interestingly though, with this, there is also the suggestion that home-prepared diets are also implicated. Either way, make no mistake that commercial cooked diet contamination, manufacturing error, as well as misformulation all have the potential to kill. There have even been reports of pentobarbital being found in some foods, and that is a drug used to euthanize animals. So surely then, the best thing any pet parent can do is to feed a raw diet or prepare their dog's food at home from the base ingredients. Now, recommending this approach, however, ignores at the very least the multiple recalls that have also affected raw diets, primarily due to the contamination with salmonella or listeria, which I'll discuss later on. It also ignores the FDA's warning about the risks of feeding raw diets, as well as the risks of giving dog bones. It also ignores repeated findings that home-prepared diets are by and large unbalanced, and even when rotated with a number of different recipes, have the potential to result in nutritional deficiencies which could compromise health or even result in death. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about the lack of evidence. So I've said many times there is no evidence, there is no evidence. But what does that actually mean, and why do we not have any clear answers? So no evidence means that there has been no studies at all, or no studies of any size, quality or reliability carried out to allow an answer to be given one way or the other with any degree of certainty. It could also mean that any information out there is mixed, and so no conclusion can be made one way or the other. Now, this is very different from saying that there is evidence that there is no benefit in a specific intervention. In this case, the health benefits of feeding either raw or commercial diets. With raw feeding being such a hot topic, surely there's a lot of interest in finding out the answers to these questions. Well, of course there is. But studies are expensive to run and take a lot of time and expertise. At least that's the case if they're well designed and they're run properly. And this fact means that many raw feeders will claim that it is only the big pet food companies that can afford to fund any form of investigation into pet food. They ask the question, who would support a good quality diet when there is so much for the man to lose? And by the man, I mean big pet food companies, of course. There is even the thinking that if raw feeding was found superior, then vets would be sued left, right and centre over their previous nutritional advice, pet food companies would be destroyed, vet schools would fail and society would crumble. Well, I made that last one up, but everything else is something that I've read and claims that I've come across. And the feeling by some is that the lack of studies also points to a cover-up. So, what's that all about? Well, I'd like to challenge both of these arguments surrounding the lack of high-quality studies into raw feeding. So sure, the raw food market is much smaller than the cooked food market, but in the US alone, it was still an industry that in 2017 generated $195 million with a year-on-year growth of around 16%. So, that's not chump change. There is and there should be more than enough in this pot to be able to put some into research, especially if the results are, as these companies are likely to expect, that raw diets are good for health and better than cooked or commercial diets, or even just that raw diets are safe. Imagine how powerful this data would be when it came to further growing their sales. Something else I've read repeatedly is that raw diet studies would be unethical because every different kind of feeding type, of diet type, would need to be tested, some of which would be clearly inappropriate. So, feeding nothing but raw chicken, for example. Anyone, again, this is rubbish, and anyone making this claim really just doesn't understand how science works and how trials work. Any trial only need include diets that are felt to be properly balanced and completely optimized for health. In other words, simply start by testing the best of the best in commercial raw diet options and ideally compare that to a commercial cooked diet. It doesn't even need to be the best commercial cooked diet. Now, that's not to say it's easy to run these studies, but it is nowhere near as complicated or as convoluted as some make out when trying to explain why none have been run to date. No test dog needs suffer unless, of course, they experience any of the risks associated with the feeding of either diets. Now, studies like this would not cover home-prepared diets per se, but a positive finding in commercial raw diets would then lend considerable weight to any form of raw feeding practice. As for there being a big cover-up, well, by who? Cooked pet food manufacturers have no reason to spend money testing the benefits of raw feeding unless they're planning to enter the market. So why will they have run these studies and then covered up the benefits of raw feeding? If they did find that there was a positive result with raw feeding, then it would again give them the market edge that they would sing from the rooftops when launching their new product. Would it then destroy their other pet food sales? Well, no. The fact is that even if all of the purported benefits of raw diets were proven to be true, raw feeding would not be something that every pet owner would even consider. And that could be due to the risks of raw diets, which I'm going to come on to in a little bit, or simply due to the costs, with commercial raw diets generally being significantly more expensive than the cooked counterparts. And if you really believe that all vets want nothing more than to keep their patients sick in a quest to line their bulging pockets, then you really do have some trust issues you need to work through. Okay, so what are the potential risks with raw diets? Do the benefits outweigh the risks of raw diets? So we've gone through the benefits, or at least the potential benefits, of feeding a raw diet to your dog or cat. Are you convinced and ready to make the switch? Or are you happy with your pet's current diet? Well, it's vital that you know about the potential risks of feeding raw food before drawing any kind of conclusion. And this includes risks to ourselves as well as our pet dogs and our pet cats. So raw diet deficiencies is something that I've already touched on. So this one is primarily for all of you feeding or thinking about feeding home prepared diets in particular, and actually covers any form of home prepared diet, not just raw diets. So making sure that you're providing the minimum requirements for every nutrient without then overdoing things in other nutrients is a real challenge. So there are repeated reports of dogs and cats developing either deficiencies or excesses that then result in serious diseases being seen. Admittedly, a lot of these reports are through the feeding of ridiculous diets. Surely anyone would appreciate the fact that feeding puppies a diet that consisted of 80% rice and 20% raw meat, and that is a real example, is not going to end well. Time and again though, I personally see new puppies being fed the most ludicrous of diets on the strict instructions from their breeder that then go unquestioned by their new owner. Feeding nothing but porridge or the breakfast cereal Wheat Bix is not all that uncommon, and unsurprisingly fails to meet the requirements for a growing puppy. Now, a common counter by those who do feed home prepared diets is that feeding a variety of different recipes will get around this potential risk. Now, it's certainly true that this will help, and I absolutely don't believe that every single mouthful in a dog or cat's diet and every single mouthful they eat needs to be completely balanced. In some studies though, even when this diet rotation and variability is considered, the overall result was that an individual pet still did not receive all of their minimum dietary requirements. Now, it might seem that they're healthy, but underlying deficiencies, they may well lead to detrimental effects to long-term health and cause problems that may not even appear to be linked to the diet that they're eating in the first place. So So the next risk of feeding raw diets is infection risk. Now, it should be no surprise that raw meat contains bacteria that are killed on cooking. In fact, raw diets, both home prepared and commercial, are often contaminated with salmonella, with E. coli, with Campylobacter and Listeria, as well as Toxoplasma, Neospora and Cryptosporidium. It may well be that a healthy adult dog or cat will never become unwell from eating food contaminated with these organisms. There will, however, be the potential for spreading them in their environment, and the young, the old or unwell, however, will also be at a greater risk of developing serious infections that have the potential to be life-threatening. But how often are these bugs found in raw food? Well, numbers clearly do vary, but we'll start with salmonella, and it's been found on 80% of raw chicken diets tested, and is also frequently present in diets containing other ingredients. And this is compared to 0% of commercial dry foods. Now, E. coli has been found in between 50 and 100% of commercial raw diets, again, and that compares to 33% of commercial dry diets and 8% of commercial wet diets. So it is potentially present in commercial food, but at a much reduced frequency. Even worse though, in one paper, 1 in 4 of these diets contaminated with E. coli actually contained an E. coli that caused kidney failure in people, and 4 in 5 contained antibiotic resistant bacteria. So I'll say that again, antibiotic resistant bacteria. Make no mistake, these bugs can result in disease in dogs and cats and have been known to kill. In one outbreak alone, which was caused by the feeding of meat unfit for human consumption, 27 puppies from 8 litters were affected, with 10 puppies dying. Cats are not immune, with fatal salmonella infections also being reported. Now, this might not be common, but it should not be ignored, especially when it comes to infection risk in people. Even healthy pets who suffer no outward signs of disease have the potential to shed these bacteria in their feces and contaminate the diet, and more on this later. So bones causing problems is the next thing. So let's move on to the feeding of bones. Now, I've already discussed the impact bones can have on oral health and dental disease. Bones can result in cleaner teeth, but can also cause some pretty nasty and pretty painful broken teeth. Now, the risk of this does depend on the type of bone being fed, with the large weight-bearing bones of animals like cattle and sheep being the worst offenders. But the other big and potentially more serious risk of bone feeding is that the bone gets stuck somewhere within the intestinal tract, blocking the way and ultimately punching holes right through the intestinal wall, which, you know, is bad news. You won't need me to tell you that. Any animal with an intestinal obstruction needs it to be cleared as a matter of urgency, something that typically requires emergency surgery. And even when it's caught nice and early, whenever the intestines have to be cut into, the risk of serious complications is around 1 in 10 cases. So if the bone fragment's sharp or the blockage has been present for some time, then there is a real risk of the intestines kind of being punctured and the dog or cat developing something called septic peritonitis. And this is a condition that has a fatality rate of around 50%. So about half of animals that develop septic peritonitis are likely to die. And it's not just cooked bones that have this risk. And even something like chicken necks have the same risk, especially if they're given to a larger dog who then decides to swallow one whole. So many dogs may be absolutely fine if fed on bones. They may get them every day for their whole life and never have problems, but the risk is there. I've seen the problem time and again. So those are some risks to our pets, but there's also risks to the owner for raw feeding. And in honesty, this is often the biggest reason that a lot of vets don't recommend feeding dogs raw food. There is a risk of all the bugs that we've just spoken about a few minutes ago being transferred to the people in that pet's environment. So that includes salmonella, it includes the strain of E. coli that has the potential to cause kidney failure, and of course we can't forget about the bacterial resistant, the antibiotic resistant bacteria that can be present as well. So there are a number of risk points that we need to consider, and areas and times when risks are there. So diet preparation, the feeding area, kind of chew toys and licking, and poop management. So the first risk of raw feeding is simply the act of preparing any raw diet, be that simply putting a commercial diet in a bowl, through to preparing a raw banquet from scratch. So common sense would dictate that this would be no higher than preparing a meat diet for yourself. And after all, how often do we get sick after handling raw meat, so long as we adopt good hygiene practices? Be sure to use dedicated raw meat utensils and chopping boards, practice good hand hygiene, and take your time to avoid contaminating any other surfaces. You know, if you do the same when preparing your pet's meal, then this risk factor is going to be reduced. The same risks are present in whatever area you choose to feed your pets. So dogs and cats, they don't have the best table manners, and you can be sure that their food, makes it out of the bowl and onto the surrounding floor and the walls. Hygiene, again, is vital, but consider this. It has been found that the normal ways of cleaning and disinfecting food bowls are all actually pretty ineffective at getting rid of salmonella, and that includes soaking in bleach or putting through the dishwasher. Everything may look nice and clean, but there may still be bugs present just waiting to make you sick. Now, after eating, your pet is then going to be spreading these potentially harmful pathogens in their environment. So that ball your dog carries around the house with them, your cat grooming themselves and transferring the bugs from their mouth onto their fur, just waiting for you to stroke them. And what about your dog licking your hand or even your kid's face? So no matter how much you clean, there is little you can do about some of these potential issues. The risk of your pet's poop is the final source of bacteria passing from our pets to us. Clearly, a dog who is unwell with diarrhea could be shedding some pretty toxic stool, but don't be fooled by solid poop and a healthy animal. So it is pretty common for perfectly healthy pets to have harmful bacteria. In those bacteria that we've already spoken about present in their stool for up to a week after the contaminated meat was eaten. Okay, so this is the risk that raw feeding has for us as dog and cat owners who choose to feed raw. But just how common are these infections being transferred from pets to people? Well, the reported numbers are really low. Now, there have been outbreaks of salmonella passing from an infected animal facility to the human workers there, as well as also infecting their family back home. In one outbreak, 18 humans were affected after 36 animals became infected, with some of these animals even dying. It is salmonella that is the biggest risk, resulting in the most hospital admissions when compared to the other bugs already mentioned. If we take the UK as an example, in the UK alone, salmonella is also responsible for 200 deaths a year. But that's from all causes, and the vast majority of those are likely to be from handling contaminated human food or from other sources, not just from contaminated pet food or from raw-fed animals. So while infection risk to humans in a raw-fed pets environment may be low, death is still a potential outcome. And a tiny risk it may be, but that's a pretty serious complication. Now, should your vet recommend raw feeding, therefore, they could certainly then be open to legal action should someone become unwell as a result of their recommendation. Much like our pets, it is the most vulnerable that are more likely to succumb to infection and experience severe disease. So namely, young children, the elderly, and anyone who's immunocompromised. So it's one thing to accept the small risk to yourself, but if you live with someone or your pet interacts with a person who fits into one of these categories especially, then you had better make sure that you're ready to accept the entire responsibility of being the cause should they become unwell. So is commercial cooked pet food the best thing to feed your dog or cat? Well, with all this talk about the lack of evidence into any benefit of raw feeding, coupled with the many known risks, is feeding a cooked commercial diet the best thing to feed your pet? It would be understandable to assume that all pet foods are subject to feeding trials, making sure that any animal remains healthy after being fed on a given diet for a period of time. The reality, though, is very different, with a large number of diets simply being analysed in the lab to ensure that they contain a minimum quantity of certain nutrients to meet a minimum standard. Now, this is very different from ensuring that they are all formulated to optimise health. The form the nutrients are present within the diets does not even mean that they'll be digested and absorbed by the intestines. To make matters worse, there may also be another interaction with the ingredients within that diet that then goes on to have unexpected health consequences. And a perfect example of this is the recent revelation that there is a link between some grain-free, exotic and boutique dog foods and the development of heart failure. When feeding trials do take place, they are also generally only pretty short, so blood samples may be taken before and after feeding and an overall assessment of any change in health made. Again though, this is very different from saying that the diets are resulting in the best health possible for any specific individual for the course of their life. So much like the raw feeding though, this lack of evidence simply means that it is impossible to say one way or the other as to whether specific diets are optimizing health or not. So many raw feeders will claim that cooked commercial diets are resulting in a pandemic of diabetes, of kidney failure, of cancer, and any number of other illnesses that are seen in our pet population. There is just no evidence out there though that this is the case, and again, when people make claims like this about commercial diets, they're really just making the rather ridiculous assumption that all such diets are created equally, that all commercial cooked diets are the same. Now, it may be that some diets do increase the risk of these diseases. It may well be though that others have the complete opposite effect. So when it comes to making claims against commercial diets, many raw food advocates will readily criticise the feeding trials run and health evidence or lack of evidence present, yet in the same breath pass off the complete lack of any data about raw feeding as completely understandable and unimportant, and the hypocrisy can be jaw-dropping. Now, when it comes to prescription diets, the evidence situation is actually very different compared to what I've just described. So there is some excellent data showing a given diet in many cases helps the treatment of a specific disease. So if we take kidney failure as just one example, a cat fed on a kidney diet will on average live twice as long as a cat fed a standard maintenance diet. And it's for this reason, for reasons like this, that diet has a big part to play in the treatment of many different conditions our pet dogs and our cats might face in their lifetime. Now, the big caveat with the bulk of the evidence and research looking into commercial diets is that the studies were either run or funded by the manufacturer. Now, clearly this is a huge conflict of interest, but that doesn't mean that they should be discounted. It doesn't mean we should kind of cut our nose to spite our face. It's just something to consider, especially if at any point there appears to be a body of evidence developing from independent studies that point to completely the opposite conclusions of those industry-backed studies. So the next problem and concern with commercial cooked diets is contamination and fatal overdoses. So the one big risk of feeding a commercial diet is, as I've already hinted at, a misformulation resulting in disease. So this could be an unpredicted interaction between ingredients, as is likely the case with the grain-free diets causing heart failure. It could though be a diet contamination, as in the 2007 melamine poisoning outbreak that resulted in hundreds of deaths at least. And finally, there is also the potential that a manufacturing error sees the formulation of a diet that becomes toxic. And that's something that's the case in the recent recall of specific dog foods, including Hill's foods, due to them containing deadly levels of vitamin D. This latest vitamin D recall has also affected, the premium pet food company Hill's, like I've said. And for those of us that champion premium pet foods, this is a serious blow to our argument for feeding them in preference, that you can read about more in my communication with Hill's and quality control issues, and I'll leave a link to that video down in the description below. None of these commercial cooked food risks should be discounted from a discussion about the feeding of raw versus cooked diets to our dogs and cats. Yes, they may be very rare, isolated events. They are rare, isolated events, but then dogs and cats or people being fatally poisoned as a result of raw feeding is hardly a daily event either. So, what diet should you feed your pet? With all this discussion, what is the best diet for your dog or cat? Now, should you ignore the known everyday raw food health risks to both pets and people and pin your hopes on the completely unproven health benefits of these diets? Or should you instead disregard the occasional major health scares of commercial diets? Now, in my mind, the known risks that every raw-fed pet will face makes the recommendation of raw feeding at this stage irresponsible. When there are no known benefits with this practice, why would you subject your pet or your family to these risks? It may be that in the future it is shown that certain raw foods are in fact either just as healthy or healthier than the best cooked commercial diets, but until this is the case and until these diets can be produced in a way that greatly reduces infection risks, raw diets are not something that I would ever recommend feeding. Now though, if you came to me saying that you were raw feeding your dog, you understood all of the risks and the discussion surrounding raw diet feeding, that your pet was completely healthy, then I wouldn't try and dissuade you otherwise. I might disagree with your conclusions, but if you're otherwise fully informed, then I do respect your right to make whatever decision you feel is right for you, is right for your family, and is right for your pet. As I've said many times before in this video and also in other videos, a lot of topics when it comes to pet health optimization have large grey areas where there is plenty of scope for a difference of opinion. And recognising this to be the case, it's really important if each individual is to make the best choice and feel empowered to make the best choice for their family without being alienated by healthcare providers, by vets, or by kind of other pet owners. It's unhelpful to simply state that raw feeding is the wrong choice to make, full stop, and alienate a significant number of pet owners who are fully aware of the issues surrounding this practice. It's also just as unhelpful, though, to claim that raw feeding is the best way to optimise health while dismissing the potential risks involved and shaming those people who choose to feed a cooked commercial diet. Now, personally, I feed my cats a range of different commercial diets. Their primary diet is a dry kibble with a range of different wet foods added on occasion, just to make sure that they don't become dry food junkies, and will be willing to accept any diet change needed should they become unwell in the future. Now, this choice is right for them as well as being right for me and my family. What diet is right for you? I'd love to hear in the description down below. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, if you've been watching this far and you found it valuable, I'd really love it if you could leave me a comment down below with your thoughts. Let me know what you feed your pet, and also if you could share it with your friends and family. It's a really important discussion. Diet plays a cornerstone of health, and it's something that everyone should be aware of. But that's it from me. Until next time, I'm Dr. Alex. This is Our Pets Health, because they're family.